Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot daf tzadichet. This week's learning is dedicated by Robert and Paula Cohn in loving memory of Robert's brother, my uncle, Richard Cohn, on his first yahrzeit. A true Baal Chesed who helped anyone in need without seeking recognition. He was a friend to everyone, young or old, and always put others' needs before his own. He is truly missed by so many. Today's daf is sponsored by Rabbi Yochanan in loving memory of Albert ben Adel. With that, we will get started today. We have to finish up this last sugya that we were talking about. If you remember, there were two different kinds of amot in the temple. There were 5 handbreadths amot and 6 handbreadth amot. So there was a debate between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, which really was reflected in our Mishna, in their machloket, as to what the length of the Shulchan was, which we know was 2 cubits by 1 cubit. Was it 10? Because the question is, which vessels? There's clearly a pasuk in Yechezkel describing the future, the third temple, with measurements, and what seems clear there is that the measurements are in 6 handbreadths cubits, but there's some that are 5, and there were 4 exceptions in that pasuk. If you remember, it was the yesod, the base of the altar, the sovev, which is the part that went around at the height of 6 cubits, the second kind of level there, and a very narrow 1 cubit wide space, and the kranot, the horns of the altar, and the whole Mizbeach HaZahav, the altar of the golden altar, which really wasn't such a big topic for us there. But the question is, when it said Zeh, the Mizbeach HaZahav, did it mean this and just these, or did it mean this and all other vessels? If you say all other vessels, then the Shulchan, and those were the exceptions to the rule, that they were all, the ones mentioned in the pasuk, were the 5 handbreadths ones. And therefore, the question is, are all the vessels, including the Shulchan then, 5 or not? Then we had a whole discussion about what are we talking about? Which ones? The height, the cubits of this Yesod, Sovev, particularly we were focusing on the ones in the outer altar, and the Kranot. Were they in height? They were only 5, or was it in width? And the one saying it with height didn't work. Didn't work with that whole thing that if the Kohen stands on the Sovev and puts the blood downward, it'll still be on top of the Chut HaSikra. The numbers didn't work out. The second option worked out with that, but didn't work out with the size of the altar. Okay, so that didn't work out with the measurements there. And particularly by the end, we said, and particularly if, that was the size of the altar, and some of the width of the altar was less than, we'd have basically 1 cubit less of the whole altar. It didn't take up a space of 32 by 32, it really took up a space of 31 by 31, which means that the whole length of the room wouldn't be 187, but 186, and that doesn't really match the numbers. So we're now going with our third option, which is going to combine length and width, and we're going to see how, height and width, and we're going to see how that works. So last line in Tzadi Zayin Amud Bet. Elachei ka'ama bigovha. Okay, the yesod, that's the first one, is in its height. In its height, it was 5 tvachim high. Ama rochav knisa, but when it said that the sovev was a 5 handbreadth cubit, what they meant was on the width of it. Okay? Gvula el sfatas saviv, when it talked about the kranot, it was talking about both losh nahachi velosh nahachi, both height and width. Okay, so now what that means is that when you talk about the height, what are we missing here? Out of the 60 that it should be, because all the other ones are 6 handbreadth cubits and it's 10 cubits tall, then you're talking about Mizbeach Kamahave 50 v'timnaya, because you're basically going to have 58. Why 58? Because you lose 1 tefach in the height of the keren, because the height of that was 1 less, and 1 tefach in the height of the yesod, but not in the height of the sovev, because the sovev, not the height between what we started in the first one. It's not the whole height between the yesod and the sovev. It's just the one, the 1 tefach at the bottom and the 1 tefach at the top. So now you're going to end up with 58, because 68 minus 2 gets you to 58. Palge de Mizbeach Kamahave. So what's the midpoint of the Mizbeach then, where the Chut HaSikra was? 29. Now, what we want to do is we want to see when the Kohen is standing at the top of the altar on the Sovev, on the top half, but they're standing at the Sovev close to the Chut HaSikra. How far away are they? We want to get to that they're 6 cubits away. Not 6 cubits, 6 handbreadths away. 6 tfachim. So 1 whole cubit. So let's see. Mikranot va'ad sovev kamahave. So now from the top to this sovev, how much? Now remember, there's 4 amot. 4 amot times 6 is 24, but we're missing 1 because it's 1 tefach at the height of the keren. That's the 5 handbreadth tefach. So the cubit. So mikranot va'ad sovev kamahave esrim utlata. It's going to be 23. Basically 24 it would have been, but we took away 1 from the height of the keren. We get to 23 handbreadths. So how much from there to the midpoint? 23 plus, right? And now we want to get the midpoint is at 29. So the difference between 23 and 29, we all know, is 6. Shita. Utnan, that's perfect, because then basically when you're standing at that point, 23 from the top, and you go down 6, you get to 29, that's perfect. That means if the Kohen goes, right, Utnan, we go back to that Mishnah, if he does it under his feet, afilu ama achad, he does on the blood that's supposed to be on the upper part, ksheraha, it's going to be fine, because up to an ama, that's the space he has to get to the chud sikra, and with that we've resolved our problem. And a further proof of this, daikanami dechtiv chek ama va'ama rochav shma mina. Notice it calls it first the chek ama, the bosom of the ama, which is basically the way they say that's the yesod. And when it describes the sovev, it calls it ama rochav. Notice why does it use a term of rochav, which means width? Must be to say what we're talking about here is that it's in the width, as opposed to in the first one where it was in the height and not the width. And with that, shma mina, we infer from there, that's even further proof for this strange answer, so to speak, because in the end, right, it obviously wasn't their first choice to say, well, some it's talking about the height and some it's talking about width, because it seems a little weird, right? When you think it's either all height or all width, which is what they thought originally, but nothing else worked there, and therefore they had to resort to this. Okay, now we're going to move, the rest of today's daf, after the complicated numbers and all that, this is pretty straightforward and more simple. Kama ama benoni. Now we talked about this ama benoni, the average one, which we said, or the mid-positioned one, which we said is 6, and the smaller one was 5, right? 5 handbreadths. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan shishat tefachim, as we said, the ama benoni is 6 tefachim. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Avin, and Rabbi Yossi bar Avin says, and here finally we're going to connect it to our sugya, af ana nami tanina. In fact, we can learn this from our Mishnah. Rabbi Meir Omer. HaShulchan orko 12 v'rochbo 6. The Shulchan, its length is 12 handbreadths, and its width is 6, which makes perfect sense according to the Ama Benoni, right? And that's Rabbi Meir, who thinks that only the things mentioned in that verse in Yechezkel had the 5. These are all with 6, and right, the rest of the vessels, including the Shulchan. And if the Ama Benoni is 6, then simple math, 2 by 1 is basically, right, 2 by 1 cubits is 12 by 6 handbreadths. Michlal, but now what's the problem? It's called an ama benonit, which means middle ama, which means what? Okay, there's one smaller, but michlal, from here you can infer to havi ama denefisha mina. It sounds like there was an ama that was bigger than that. But we said they were either 5 or 6, so why do they call it ama benonit? Benonit literally in Hebrew means benonit, in between 2 other ones. So in fact, there were 2. The Hatznan, it says in the Mishna in Middot, okay, which is a Masechet we're going to get to in the Daf Yomi cycle, even though it's all Mishnayot. We'll get there and explain when we get there. Shte amot hayu b'Shushan abira. There were 2 measuring sticks called amma, okay, an amma, which is a cubit. They had measuring sticks. It was kind of like they're rulers, okay. They have rulers to figure out, right, how to build the different parts of the Beit HaMikdash. So they were in this room, okay, b'Shushan abira. This doesn't mean in Shushan abira. This means in the temple. There was a room which had depictions of Shushan abira on it, on the wall. It was in the entrance to the Har HaBayit, to the Temple Mount. Right in the entranceway, there was a little room which had these 2 measuring sticks that were called an amma. Echat al kerem mizrachit tzfonit, echat al kerem mizrachit dromit. Okay, they're just telling you. One was in the southeast corner, and one was in the northeast corner of the room. Okay, so basically when you get in, you're coming from the east. So on the side closest to where you're getting in, on the right and on the left, there was an amma in each place. Now they want to tell you what was the length of each of them. Why do you need 2? It wasn't 2 of the exact same size. That wouldn't be needed, even though you might think maybe they need a bunch more than 1, but each one was a different size. And each one we're going to see was larger than the Amah Benonit. Okay, and then we're going to have to figure out why. Shal kerem mizrachit tzfonit yitera al shal Moshe chatzi etzba. An etzba, as we said, is a quarter of a tefach. And I think from what I read, it's usually measured using the thumb, okay, which is a little bit thicker than an average finger. So 4 etzbaot make up a tefach. Okay, so now they did it a chatzi etzba. Okay, so 1/8 of a cubit. So we had one which was a little, Yitera shel Moshe. Moshe's was the standard. It was the one they used in building the tabernacle, the Mishkan, which was a 6 handbreadth amma, cubit. Now, this one had an etzba more, very little bit more, but chatzi etzba more. Shal kerem mizrachit romi tayta yitera aleha chatzi etzba. The next one was one more half an etzba bigger, which basically gets you Moshe etzba. So we now have 2. One is half an etzba longer, and one is 2 half etzbas longer. Okay. Lama amru achak gedola v'achak ktana. What do we need these 2 for? What's the point of making them bigger? If everything was supposed to be measured as 6 handbreadths, why did they make them 6 handbreadths plus half a finger or plus a whole finger? What they wanted was this. They paid craftsmen to build the stuff build whatever there was to build in the temple. And they hired them and they said, build us something that's 10 amod or 5 amod or 2 amod or whatever it might be. Build us something like that. And what do you pay for? You pay for the workmanship and you pay for the materials. Now, if you pay for the materials for the mizbeach to be 32 by 32, and then the craftsman comes and measures, and let's say they're off by a teeny bit, because it's very hard to be exacting. So they're off by a teeny bit. What happens? Let's say they build it a teeny bit smaller. If they build it a teeny bit smaller and they got paid for building it completely, then they use less material. And then what happens? The salary they received from Hekadesh, from sanctified money, because it was paid from the temple treasury, now ends up being used personally by the person who got paid, because they're using money that they didn't actually, deserve, because they ended up building it with less material. So they end up benefiting. And that's called me'ila. That's accidental misuse of consecrated property. So because, they didn't intentionally build it smaller, but since you can't be exacting, so therefore what they said, and these are the words, they'll notzlim b'ktana, they're going to get paid for exactly a cubit, but machzirim b'gdola, but for every cubit, they actually have to build it either in a half etzba bigger or 2 half etzbas bigger, okay? 1 whole etzba bigger. V'tarte lamali, okay, why do we need then 2? Okay, why do you need a half an etzba and a whole etzba? It doesn't make sense, just one of them. Well, chada l'kaspa v'dava, v'chada l'binyana. One was for gold and silver, which is very expensive. They didn't want to make all the craftsmen lose a lot of money on it. So they made a little bit more, and then that would resolve the problem. But when it came to binyana, where it didn't cost that much money, they were like you're saying, more machmir, right? A little bit more stringent. Let's just do a whole etzba so that people are more careful about it. And, since it's not much of a loss for the craftsman, it's worth it. It's not a time. Now we have to figure out why Shushan Bira was there. And there's a Mishna, also in Middot, which says, the same Mishna actually. Actually, no, it's not. Oh, sorry. My mistake. This Mishnah, okay, my mistake. This Mishnah is in Middot. The first Mishnah, Shteamot Hayub Shushan Bira, is actually in Masechet Kelim. It's not in Middot. Okay, so just to correct me. It's not a tam. Shar HaMizrach, Alav Shushan Bira Tzura. So the Shar HaMizrach, the eastern gate to get into the Temple Mount, had a depiction of Shushan Bira, as we saw. My time, what was this depiction of Shushan Bira doing there? Rav Chisda, Rav Yitzchak, Rav Dimi, remember the names, we're going to get onto a different machloket they had. They have a machloket here, and then because we mentioned their names, so they're going to mention some other not connected machloket. Rav Chisda, Rav Yitzchak, Rav Dimi, Chadamar, one of them said, Kadeshi Yed'u Mehecham Ba'u, so they know where they came from. Okay, what does this mean? This could mean one of 2 things. Either, so they should, now what happened? We came from there, we were under Persian rule, that's Shushan Bira was there, and then the Persian king allowed us to rebuild the temple. So remember where you came from and appreciate that you rebuild it. Others say, what do you mean? No, it's remember where you came from. Okay, this actually is very relevant to the days that we're in between Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron. Remember where we came from and be appreciative of what you have, right? And moving into Yom HaTzmaut, right? Be appreciative of what you have. So we always, this is the way the Jewish people work, right? We're always remembering and appreciating where we've gotten to and where we were. So especially in the temple, right? We were in Shushan and some other, right, kicked out of our country. And now look where we are. So and then you appreciate God. Okay, so it's either to appreciate the Persians who allowed, and Koresh who allowed us to rebuild, or to appreciate the God, or both. You could read it as both also. Chanamar, and the Mefarshim are kind of split. Chanamar kadesha tehei emat malchut alehem, so they have the fear of the ruler upon them. The Shushan Abirah is to remember that they're under Persian rule. Okay, which obviously wasn't relevant for the whole time period. But when they built it, that's what, right, that they were under the Persians, and the Persians let them rebuild, and they should be in fear of the Persians. Some people think that the Persians made them put it in so that they'd be in fear of the king. Okay, it was part of the deal. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, already if we're talking about this, he says, La'olante emat malchut alecha, right? We should always have the fear of the kingdom upon us. Shneimar, and we're going to have two different proof texts. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan said this one, Shneimar v'yardu kol avadecha ele elai v'shachavu li le'mol. So it says when Moshe tells Paro that we're going to bring makat bechorot, the slaying of the firstborn, he says, and then all your servants are going to come, elai, to me, and they're going to bow down to me saying, please leave our country. Ilu, now what's the emat malchut? How do you see the fear of the king? Because what did he say? Your avadim are going to come to me. Now who in the end comes to him? Paro himself comes and says this. But it wasn't respectful for Moshe to say, you're going to come begging. That's not respectful. So what do you see? Ilu lidide lo kamerle. He didn't say you're going to do it. So that was the way that you see that even Moshe had the fear of the kingdom upon him. Rabbi Yochanan amar mehachash, ne'emar v'yad Hashem hayta le'Eliyahu v'yishanes matna v'yaretz lefnei Achav abo chai Yisraela. That even Eliyahu, right, the great Eliyahu, had the fear of Achav. How do you see the fear of Achav in the pasuk? V'yaretz lefnei Achav. He ran before Achav, the king. Now Achav was a terrible king, and yet still Eliyahu showed him respect by running before him. That's right. There's always people who go before the king or go before the president, so that right, like the entourage. So that's what he was doing to show respect for Achav. You can come up with differences between each proof text. One of them, by the way, is a non-Jewish king, and one is a Jewish king, albeit he was a bad king, but he was a Jewish king. It's one difference. Anyway, I think the difference, the way he shows respect is also different. Let's say Achav is more positive respect, whereas with Paro, it's more not doing something disrespectful. Anyway, you can think of some other differences. Okay, now, because we mentioned Rav Chisda, Rav Yitzchak, Rav Dimi, we're going to mention a different machloket they had. Alehu litrufa. Okay, we're cutting this from a pasuk. There's a long pasuk which is in those prakim of Yechezkel that we discussed in the 40s, chapters of the 40s in Yechezkel. There's a description of the future temple. In chapter 47, it describes, in this pasuk that we're quoting, a stream that's going to come out from the Kodesh Kodeshim in the future. It's going to come out from there and stream out and water all the trees, anything that gets watered from it, everything's going to blossom. There's going to be a lot of fruits coming. And the last words in that pasuk are alehu litrufa. First it says the fruits will be for eating, and the leaves will be for medicinal purposes. So Rav Chisda and Rav Yitzchak Rav Dimi have a disagreement. What is going to be cured by this special water? Right, by these leaves that are watered by the special water. Chad amar lahatir pesha lemala, v'chad amar lahatir pesha lemata. One says to cure the mouth from above, and the other says to cure the mouth from below. Okay, what does this mean? So I could explain it right now, but in another second, the Gemara is going to explain it by saying that there's two others who have the same machloket here, and they just describe it a little bit in more words. Itmar. It was also said, Chizki amar lahatir pe ilmim, that those who are mute and can't speak will be healed and they'll be able to speak. Bar Kapara amar lahatir pe akarot. Right, so the pelamala is the mouth, and the pelamata is the opening at the lower in people's bodies, meaning of the women. And it's going to heal the wombs of the women that they'll be able to carry children. Those who can't carry children will be able to bear children. Tanu Rabbanan. Ilu ne'emal. Okay, now we're moving back to the Lechem HaPanim. So the Lechem HaPanim, it says in the Pasuk, okay, we're going to read through two Psukim. Vayikra chapter 24, Psukim Hey and Vav, 5 and 6. And what they're basically going to do here, kind of like a bingo, in the song bingo, where you get rid of the B, you get rid of the I, you get rid of the N, like that kind of thing. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to try to say, what if you got rid of this word? What if you got rid of that word? Okay, why are all these words here? Theoretically, they're not all necessary. So what are the words we're going to get rid of? Well, first it says, this is how you should make the breads. Take soleh, rafita, ota, 12 chalot. So you're supposed to make 12 loaves. Okay, and then it says shnei esronim. Okay, that we don't need, but it's right. Each one is about 4 kilos. V'samta otam shtayim marachot. The next pasuk I'm skipping to. Samta otam shtayim marachot. Put them in 2 sections, right? 2. I'm not sure the best word for translating marachot, but that's in the pictures. 2 stacks. Thank you. 2 stacks. Okay, those are both on both sides of the table that we've learned this. And how many in each? 6 hamarechet. There should be 6 on each marechet. Okay, to me and you, that would seem pretty basic. They can tell you the number of the loaves, how many stacks there are, and how many go in each stack. But you can already start thinking, well, maybe you should be able to figure out a lot of this on your own without all the words. Okay, and what if we got rid of the 12? What if we got rid of the 6? What if we got rid of the 2? Marachot, we're going to basically go through like that. So the breita, it's a breita, Tanu Rabanan. Ilu ne'amar, if it had said, v'lakachta soleh v'afita ota 12 chalot, v'samta otam 2 marachot, v'lo ne'amar 6, if you just told me, okay, 12 loaves, 2 stacks. Wouldn't you do the simple math? Okay, 2 stacks, 6 and 6. Why do you need to say 6 in each stack? So hayiti omer, echad shel arba ve'echad shel shmone. Maybe I would have thought, wait a minute, you could divide 12 in many different ways. I mean, you could have come up with 5 and 7, but maybe take an even number and say 4 and 8. So that's why I have to tell you there have to be 6 in each. Okay, it sounds strange to us because we're so used to knowing it's 6 and 6, but theoretically you could have thought 1 big one, 1 small one. L'chach ne'amar 6. Okay, that's why you needed 6. Now we're going to do another one. Ilu ne'amar 2 marachot 6 hamarechet. Okay, what about 2 marachot, 2 stacks, 6 on each stack? Pretty simple math. Everyone would know 12. So lo ne'amar 12. What if it didn't say 12? What might I have thought? Hayiti omer 3 shel 6. Maybe I would have thought it was 18. Why 18? 2 stacks, 6 on a stack. But because it says 2 stacks, and then it says 6 the stack, okay, that's literally how it translates, 6 hama'arechet, you might have thought it means 6 on each plus another ma'arechet of 6. Maybe. So that's why you had to tell us, l'chach ne'amar 12. That's why it says 12, so you don't think there's 18. Ilu ne'amar 12 chalot u'marachot. What if it said 12 chalot, and then it said, and there's marachot. V'lo ne'amar 2 v'shesh. It doesn't tell you 2 marachot, 2 stacks, and it doesn't tell you 6 in each stack. Hayiti omer 3 shel arba. You might have thought maybe there's 3 stacks with 4 in each, right? Again, this is all just how many ways can you get to 12? L'chach ne'amar 2 v'shesh. That's why it says 2 and 6. Okay, now we're just going to basically review. The Breita reviews and says, Ha'ad shelo amru 3 makrot halalu lo lamanu. So without all these 3 psukim, it's not 3 psukim, but 3 sections of the pasuk, 3 phrases, I wouldn't have known what to do. Ha'ketzad. So now, how do you do it? This we know already, but they're just repeating it to summarize. Noten 2 marachot shel 6. You do 2 stacks of 6 each. Ve'im natan echad shel 4 ve'echad shel 8 lo yatsa. And if you did 4 on one and 8 on the other, you wouldn't fulfill your obligation. Now, what if you did 2 shel 7? What if you did 2 stacks with 7? Okay, 4 and 8 is not going to work because each stack doesn't have 6. But if you do 2 of 7, you actually have 2 stacks of 6. You just added an additional one. So Rabbi Yochanan, you can just look at it, there's 6. You can ignore the 7th one and just say, okay, there's 6. It's fine. Forget the fact that there's 7, which is interesting because we always say, right, don't add, right? This doesn't seem to be that kind of an issue, at least according to Rabbi. He thinks 7 are fine. We're going to have a bit of an issue with this. Okay, they don't quote the rest of the pasuk, but what is it? What does the next pasuk say? V'natata al hama'arechet levona zakah. You put on the stack, which we learned already is at the top of the stack, you put the frankincense, the bowls of frankincense, the bezichei levona. So it says put on it. Now, if you put it on the 7th one, and the 7th one is we're kind of ignoring, it's actually not on one of the lechem apadim because that one doesn't go into the count. And then it's not on. So that's a problem. To which Amar le Rav Chisda le Rav Hamnuna, Amar le Rav Hamnuna le Rav Chisda. Either Rav Chisda said to Rav Hamnuna or Rav Hamnuna said to Rav Chisda. He answers it, Rebbe l'ta'ameh Amar al b'samuch. Remember, we learned this already a few times. Rebbe goes according to his interpretation, his own, which we see elsewhere, which al means next to, not necessarily on top of. Okay, and what's it? What we're going to see now. Where would it be next to what? Do you remember? We just saw this. If you're this is a good review of a sugya we saw on 2 days ago, which is if the table is 12 by 6, and if you remember, the length of the table is 12, but the width goes by the length of the table. And the width of the breads, according to everybody, was 5. So if, 5 handbreadths, we're talking about in handbreadths, if the bread took up 5 on this side and 5 on that side, it takes up a space of 10. Excuse me. If it takes up a space of 10 and there's 12 on the table, then there's space in between the two, and that's where the bezichei levona go. That's Rabbi Meir. If you hold by Rabbi Yehuda that it was 10, then 5 and 5 take up the whole space, and there is no space. And that opinion, we said, would have to say that the bezichei levona go on the breads. Okay, so basically you'd have to say the Rebbe holds that the al b'samuch means it goes on the table and it doesn't actually go physically on the breads, and then that works with, you could have 7. The person who says it goes on top of the breads wouldn't be able to say this. But right now, all we're dealing with is Rebbe. Now, how do we know Rebbe holds this way? Titanya Rebbe Omer, v'natata ala ma'arechet levona zakah al b'samuch. To which the Braita continues and then says, are you sure? Ata omer al b'samuch ve'enu ela al mamash. What do you mean? Al maybe means on top of. How do you get that it means next to? In the case of the lechem apanim, kishu omer v'sakota al ha'aron et ha'parochet, ve'omer al b'samuch. Okay, I'm going to show you a picture. I wouldn't have necessarily shown it now, but since we're anyway going to look at these pictures later, I'll show you right now. Picture of the Aron and the Parochet. Where's the Parochet compared to the Aron, right? This is a picture inside the Kodesh Kodeshim. These are, again, pictures from the Machon HaMikdash. So, when you walk in the Kohen, here's the Parochet, and then the Kohen walks in, and there's the Aron. Now, the Parochet, it says here, V'sakota, you should cover the Aron et HaParochet, with the Parochet. Now, the Parochet is not covering physically on top of the Aron, right? The Aron is open, exposed. It's not covered with the Parochet. The Parochet is at the entrance to the room, right? It's the curtain that basically blocks off the room. And when you go in the room, right near the Parochet is the Aron. So there you see that al is b'samuch. Nobody thinks that the Aron goes on, that the Parochet goes on top of the Aron. Havei omer. So from there you learn al is b'samuch. Okay, that al means next to. Now we're going to see that kol akelim. I wanted to open one more thing here that I will share. 1 second. 1 second. Okay, we're going to share our map. Okay, and today we're going to look again at the map, and we're going to see. We're going to use a bunch of different pictures. Okay, they're all from Machon HaMikdash. This map is really, really important. We've talked about it before. Okay, it's a map of the temple. I highly, highly recommend for people to order it, either a physical copy or a digital copy from the Machon HaMikdash. Particularly, we need it here and there for our Masechet. But when we get to Masechet Middot, for example, that I was mentioning, it's completely necessary. It's very hard to look without. What I also would recommend, if you want to buy a book for your house, there's a bunch of different books. Okay, I'm not going to recommend one or the other, but there's different books. Some put out by Machon HaMikdash, some put out by other companies with pictures of the Beit HaMikdash. And there's nothing, if you're learning Daf Yomi and you're reading we're spending a lot of time on the temple, there's nothing like seeing pictures of it actually taking place. Again, it's not real pictures, obviously. It's just depictions of it, but what the vessels look like, what this looks like. Now, again, you never really know if it's 100% accurate. In fact, today we're going to see an inaccuracy on this map, which I don't know the answer for. Maybe there's some other opinion. But basically, like, we're going to see something that is depicted here that is not the way it's depicted in the picture. In the sugya, and also not in the picture that we saw. So I don't know why they depicted it that way. But again, the pictures are showing often one opinion and one way of doing it. It doesn't mean it's the only way, and it doesn't mean these pictures are perfectly right, but they definitely help in terms of visualizing what was going on there. Okay, so with that, kol kelim shababikdash. Okay, we said their orkan, their length. Okay, we're now going to see. I'm reading out the Mishna what the line there was. Kol kelim shayu b'mikdash, right? Or it's the same thing. Orkan shalabayit. Okay, what does that mean? This is why I wanted to bring up the map. Okay, we talked in yesterday's daf about the length of the room, right? The length of the room was 187 from the the Israelite courtyard, the Israel, then the priest courtyard, all the way down this room. Okay, so we're going to talk about basically the length of the room goes this way, east to west. So all the vessels go east to west. Okay, and we're going to see that right now. Okay, if you look at the table, it goes east-west. You look at the menorah, it goes east-west. You see that? Okay, although we're going to have a whole discussion about this later. But, okay, the altar is a square, so it doesn't make a difference. But the point is that when we have vessels that the length is different than the width, the length is going to be, meaning it's going to go the length of the room, it's going to go east-west. But, except for we're going to see there's an exception. Tanu Rabbanan. So now we're going to have a braita. Kol hakelim shebamikdash orkan leorko shel bayit. Chutz me'aron she'orko lerochbo shel bayit. Okay, the length of the aron goes the width of the room, which basically means the aron is going to be north-south. Okay, it's going to go this way and not that way. Now the problem here is, I'll just undo what I just did because it's going to block your view. But if you look here at the aron, the picture of the aron here actually looks like it's longer. Okay, unless I'm just misreading the picture. There's the yellow in the middle. I don't know. It looks to me like the aron is going the long way. I don't know why that is. And if you look in the picture, okay, that we saw before of the aron, it's actually, you can't exactly see it, but it's definitely wider on the face where the kohanim is facing it. Okay, so again, remember the kohanim is facing it. He's facing west, and the aron is going north-south. Okay, that's clear from this picture. Okay, and we're going to talk about it now, how we know that that's the case. Okay, the Braita is going to explain. Well, the good truth is the Gemara is going to explain. First, the Braita says, munach, v'kachayu badav munachim. That's the way it was. Okay, meaning it was north-south, the length of it. So again, when you walk in, you're going to see the longer side, and then the shorter side is parallel to the walls that are on your sides. And that's the way the badav were muchanim. Now the badav are the poles. There's poles because in the time of the Mishkan they used to carry it, but there were also poles. So there were poles on the Aron always, and the poles. Well, it sounds like it's saying also the poles went north-south, and that's actually the way it looks in the picture I showed you on the map. Looks like the poles are going the same direction as the Aron. But in our picture, they're not at all. The poles are going south, are going east-west, and the aron's going north-south. So we don't understand what this means. My kamar, what does this mean? Hachi kamar, this is what it means. We know it went this way based on the way the badim went. Okay, meaning we're now going to learn that the badim were perpendicular to it, and because we know that we're going to have to explain how we know the badim were perpendicular. First, we're going to explain how we know the badim went east-west, and then we're going to say, and how do we know the badim were perpendicular to it? And therefore, right, basically the other direction of it, and therefore it's going to be clear that since we know about the badim, we're going to know that the aron went the other way. So, badav minalan, how do we know? Ditanya, there's a very strange pasuk. It says, vayarichu abadim, it's in Sefer Melachim Aleph, in the Temple of Shlomo. They were long. Right, they extended out. Vayera'u Rashi Abadim in a Kodesh, and you could see them from the Kodesh. Now the Kodesh is the Eichal. Remember, only the Kohen Gadol went into here. So who was seeing it? The people in the sanctuary. Al Pnei Advir, v'lo yera'u achutza, but they wouldn't be seen outside. Okay, that's very confusing. They were seen, they weren't seen. So they say, V'erichu Abadim. The Braita says, Yacholo ayu nogim b'parochet. You might have thought maybe they're not touching the parochet at all, right? Which is the curtain there. Talmud Lomar vayera'u. It says, what do you mean? They were seen, so they must have been touching the parochet if they could be seen on the other side. Maybe they made a hole in the parochet and went all the way out. Maybe they really saw them completely. Then they say no, but Talmud Lomar lo yera'u achutza. But then it says they weren't seen. So haketzad. So how could this possibly work? Dochakim uboltim b'parochet v'domin kimin. Okay, so the top of Amud Bet now. They stuck out of the parocha. Very interesting image. They look like the breasts of a woman. You'll see in a minute why they say that. But basically, two poles jutting out from the parochet. So if you're standing on the other side, that's what it looked like. Okay, using Shir Shirim as an analogy, right, to God's relationship with the Jewish people. And this is right. The Aron is God, basically. So there would be this vision, right? So it would look like two breasts of a woman coming out. Umin is showing the love of God, basically, or showing God's presence to the people. So, Uminalan debadav lefuti da Aron. Okay, so that explains that they were obviously going east-west, otherwise they wouldn't be jutting out. Uminalan debadav lefuti da Aron haviyat. And how do we know it was going the other direction as the Aron was going? That the length of those was going by the width of the Aron and not by the same direction as the length. Dilmalor koshel Aron haviyat. Maybe they were going along the length of the Aron. Amar Rav Yehuda trei gavre ba'amtu palga lo mistagilhu. Two people can't fit in. Okay, the width of that would basically mean that the space between the two badim, if it went the length, parallel to the length of it, the space would be the width. The width of the Aron was 1.5 cubits. Now, you can't fit two people. Okay, what was this meant for? In the Mishkan, it was meant for carrying, right? This is the same one that was used in the Mishkan. So, it was meant for carrying the Aron. Now, two people can't fit in a space of 1.5 cubits. That's kini. Okay, so how do you know 4 people carried it, 2 in the front and 2 in the back, and then each, right, in the front poles and the back poles, you would need 2 people to fit in. How do you know that? Because Dichtiv v'nasua ka'atim trei nosei hamikdash nami trei. It says nasua ka'atim nosei hamikdash. Now the mikdash they assume means the aron because that was the centerpiece of the mikdash, and it says ka'atim are plural and nosei hamikdash is plural. So there's 2 plurals there, 2 and another 2 equals 4. Now we get to where were the shulchanot in the room. Tanu Rabbanan, asara shulchanot asa Shlomo HaMelech. Okay, I'm going to show you a picture, but I don't want to show it to you yet because it's going to kind of make it hard to understand the discussions the Gemara is going to have about this. But I'll show you soon. So in Shlomo, now in the first temple, in the Mishkan, there was 1 shulchan, 1 menorah, and we always imagine a shulchan and a menorah. But Shlomo, we've seen this before, built 10 shulchanot and 10 menorot in addition to the one that was in the time of Moshe. Okay? He thought it would just make it look beautiful, fill up the room with lots of menorahs and shulchanot. So asara shulchanot asa Shlomo HaMelech shene'emar. How do we know? Because it says in the pasuk shene'emar. Okay, it's a pasuk from Divrei Hayamim, Chronicles. Vayas shulchanot asara vayanach behechal 5 yamin ו5 mismol. So he put shulchanot 10 in, and he put them in the hechal, 5 from the left and 5 from the right. Okay, what I'm going to pull up now is, before we see the picture of the 10, I'm going to pull up the map. So in the map, they obviously only show 1 menorah, 1 shulchan. Okay, but it says 5 from the left and 5 to the right. Okay, so it sounds like im tomar 5 yamina petach 5 mismola petach. You walk into the sanctuary, and on the right side and on the left side, he put all the 10 menorot, shulchanot. Im kain, what's the problem? Well, that means that the shulchan, remember this map, the north is at the bottom and south is at the top. That would mean that the shulchanot would be also on the north side and also on the south side of the hechal, because it would fill up the whole thing. And that can't possibly be true, because in Kematzinu shulchan b'darom, there were shulchanot then on the south side. V'atorah amra v'shulchan tziten al tzel hatzafon, and that's how it shows it in the picture. The shulchan is here in the north, and the menorah is in the south. Okay, we're going to see that the menorah is supposed to be opposite the shulchan. So if the shulchan's in the north, then the menorah is in the south. So it can't possibly be that miyamin in small means to the right of the room and to the left of the room, because it means then it's going to cover all sides, and it can't possibly be. It has to be on the north. So it sounds like, according to this, it's going east-west, like we discussed, and right, because if it went the other way, it was chamisham yamin, chamisham mismol, it would be going south, north-south, or south-north. So it must be Moshe's was in the middle, and then 5 on his right and 5 on his left. Okay, so imagine this is the shulchan. They would put that one in the middle, and then 5 would be to the right of it, and 5 would be to the left of it. Okay, but we're going to get back to this later and say something doesn't exactly jive. Tanu Rabbanan, Eser menorot asa Shlomo. Same thing with the menorah. Shenemar v'yaset menorot hazahavas. Eser kamishpat, also from Divrei Hayamim. V'yitem behechal 5 miyamin ו5 misomol. Same problem. Im tomar 5 miyamin petach ו5 mismola petach. If you say 5 are on the right of the entrance, 5 are on the left of the entrance, in kain matzinu menorah b'tzafon, then the menorah is going to be on the north side, and that's not, can't be. HaTorah amru ve'et hamenorah nochach hashulchan. The menorah should be opposite the shulchan. Okay, same thing, the menorah must be in the middle. Okay, next thing they want to tell us is, and this is all going to come together at the end, Tanich, where in the sanctuary was the menorah and the shulchan placed? So Tanicha, the one Braita says, Mechatzi bayit v'lifnim hayu munachim, from the inner half of the room. So basically, if the room, the hechal was 40 cubits by 20 cubits, so the length was 40, then it started from the middle 20, right? When you get to the 20 cubit line, started from there, and it was in that part, okay, the inner part of the room. But a different breadth says from a third of the way into the room, which would then be, right, a third of the way into 40. It wouldn't be a 20 cubits. It would be earlier than that. So now they say below kasha, but really they don't disagree, because the whole question is what room were they talking about? There's the sanctuary and there's the Kodesh Kodeshim. The Kodesh Kodeshim was 20, another 20. It was 20 by 20. And this was 40 by 20. So if you count the whole room, okay, the one that said a third counted the 40 plus the 20, which is 60. Now when you get to a third of 60, you're going to be 20 cubits into the room. So it's the same thing. And the other one who said it was halfway into the room didn't count the Kodesh Kodeshim, only counted the 40, and therefore they're really saying the same thing. Okay, now we have a machloket. So until now we said, and this obviously one of these opinions disagrees with our Mishnah, because we said all the kelim were or kok or koshel cheder, meaning they were all going east-west. Tanu Rabbanan, Mizrach u'Ma'arav yumunachim divrei Rebbe. So divrei Rebbe is what we saw. The menorah is, okay, specifically we seem to be talking about the Shulchan here. Okay, the Shulchan went east-west. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Tzafon v'Darom, north-south. Okay, he has the Shulchan not the way it's depicted in this picture. The Shulchan went north-south. Okay, now we have to understand why and figure out what the issues are. My Tamid Rebbe, Gamar mi menorah, ma menorah mizbach u'ma'arav, af haninami mizrach u'ma'arav. So we learned it from the menorah. The menorah is east-west, and therefore the Shulchan is east-west. Menorah gufa menalan. Okay, how do we know the menorah was east-west? Maybe that was north-south. Midichtiv b'ner ma'aravi. Now it says ya'aruch oto lifnei Hashem. It says put that one before God. Now it doesn't actually say ner ma'aravi, but what do they assume? They assume when it says put it is singular. Now there were 7 candles there, 7 wicks. So it must be they're talking about the easternmost one, the westernmost one, which is the one that's closest to the Kodesh Kodeshim. So one of them should be Lifnei Hashem. Michlal dekulu lav Lifnei Hashem. It seems to imply that all the others aren't. Now, Isa Gadatach, look at our picture. If you say it's Safon Darom, kulu nami Lifnei Hashem ninu. If it's Safon Darom and it's not going like this picture, in this picture you can see that it's going east-west, and the last candle is obviously closer to the parochet. But if you move the menorah and you put it north-south and it's parallel to the parochet, then all the candles, all the lights are basically the same distance from the Lifnei Hashem. So therefore it must be that was east-west, and therefore the table was east-west. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon, my time. Where does he learn it from? Gamar me'aron. He says, remember the Aron we learned goes north-south. So, just like the Aron goes, Ma'aron tzafon v'darom, af haninami tzafon darom. So also the menorah went, also the Shulchan went tzafon darom. Okay, so now we have to do the ping pong. Rebbe nami ligmar me'aron. Why didn't Rebbe learn it from the Aron? Very obviously, because danim chutz mi chutz ve'ein danim chutz mi pnim. He'd rather learn it from the menorah, because the menorah is outside the Kodesh Kodeshim, whereas the Aron is inside. Don't learn something from inside the Kodesh Kodeshim from things, right? Don't learn outside from inside. Rabbi Shimon ligmar mi menorah. Why didn't he learn it from menorah? Amar lecha. Here's his answer: menorah gufa tzafon darom havamancha. He thinks the Shulchan and the menorah were both north-south, and he learns them both from the Aron. Okay, fine. Now we're going to have a whole big problem with this. The menorah and the Shulchan were north-south. Ela haktiv ya'aroch oto Aron ubanav. Okay, first problem. Didn't we say one of the candles was closer to the sanctuary, right, the Kodesh Kodeshim? Can't be if the whole thing is north-south. It's parallel. This is a famous opinion that the inner, okay, it says the lights went el mul pnei hamenorah. They went toward the menorah, the wicks. How could they go toward the menorah? Right there, they are in the menorah. So they all went toward the middle, and the middle one was facing the parochet. So it wasn't the westernmost one, okay? It was actually the middle one, which was the one that was considered Lifnei Hashem, because its wick went out. The whole menorah was actually equally, all the candles there. But one wick faced the Aron. Okay, and that we explained. So, Amar Rabbi Natan, Mikansha Emtsei Meshubach. From there you see it's the Emtsei one, which was the special one. Now, here we're going to go with a question, okay? Bishlama de'amar mizrach u'ma'arav. This is our first question that we're going to deal with today. The next stuff we're going to deal with more issues with the different opinions here. But right now we're going to say mizrach u'ma'arav works much better. Why? Hainu dahavu yitive asara be'esrim. Okay, the first problem is that if you say east-west, now here's the room. We said it starts from the middle of the sanctuary. So that means you're going to basically go from the middle of the room, 20. You have 20 left for the room, and you're going to put menorah, going lengthwise. The length of each menorah is 2. 2 times 10 is 20. And then you're going to get to the end of the room. Perfect. And by the way, what we're going to see in a minute is that you can't be exact. So even if it juts out a little, so fine. We start in the midpoint of the room, but if it's a little bit earlier, it's just empty space there. But if you go tzafon darom, from here, right, you're going to go from this wall to this wall. Now, these are walls. So if you're going to go wall to wall and have menorah going across the whole, or actually we're talking about the shulchan here. It doesn't matter. You could say the same thing for the menorah. But if you go the shulchan, it covers shulchan. Now, it's also 20. So now you're going to have a problem because how are you going to get 10 into 20? Because 10 times 2 is 20. It's going to be exactly 20 cubits. They're going to have to fit exactly one into the other. It's very hard to fit that between wall to wall, okay? Because you're basically leaving no room for, ever try to fit books into a bookshelf, right? You have to, sometimes, like, if they fit exactly, it's really, really hard to get them in. That's number one problem. 2, look at how I drew it. Kohanim, right? The Kohanim are going to bump into the shulchanot when they're trying to get into the room. How they're going to get past them. V'tu, matzinu 5 shulchanot b'darom. Also, you're going to have 5 shulchanot on the wrong side of the room. Okay? V'tu, one more problem, you forgot that this was 10 in addition to Moshe's. Shulchan de Moshe, hechi manachlu. Where's the shulchan of Moshe going to go? Okay, so we have a big problem. So this one doesn't really make sense. Now we're going to end with, wait a minute, but there's a problem. Okay, now I'm going to finally show you the picture that I wanted to show you, which is, here's the depiction of the 10 in the room. Notice they're going east-west because there's the parochet. Okay, and what do you see here? Where's the shulchan of Moshe? The shulchan of Moshe is here. Okay, let's put it in white so you can see it. Shulchan of Moshe is here. Okay, and the menorah is there. Okay, so what do they say? Where are you going to put the shulchan of Moshe? You still only have, remember, if it starts from the midpoint of the room, which is here, right, you're going to have 5 times, right, you're going to have 5 times 2. Okay, you're going to have, right now we think, I messed up by showing you the picture right now. Right now we think it's a line of 10 in a row. So if you say, Mizrach Marav Nami Shulchan de Moshe Chimanachlu, Ela Misavart Chadar Have, Trey Darinenu. Who's to say, right, if it's one line, then you only have 20 cubits. Even if it juts out a bit, let's say, into the earlier part of the room, but here you need to fit another whole 2 cubits. It can't start from the middle of the room. You're going to need 22. So they say, there were 2 rows, and that way it didn't take up, and there's space in between, as you can see, for the kohanim to walk around. And the shulchan of Moshe was the innermost point, but in between the 2 rows. Okay, I've seen actually different pictures where some people think it's actually in the middle, like in the center in between the 2 of them, not at the end of the room, near the parochet, but it does make more sense to put it here the way they do, near the parochet. Okay, with that we finished. So quick review. We started with figuring out the measurements, which one were 5, which one were 6, and which exactly, right, height, width, we ended up with a combo. Then we went to the Amah Benonid and then said there must be bigger ones then. So what are they? And we explained those and their purpose. And that we got into the Shushan and Birah, what that was doing there in the Amana Malchut and all that. Then we got into this other machloka between them, which I'm not going to get back to, about the Aleo L'Trufa. From there, we got to the Shtei Alechem, why we needed 12, 6, and 2, why all that. Each of those words was necessary. And then we got to that the vessels go lengthwise in the room, although we saw now that there's an opinion that they actually didn't go lengthwise, but they went widthwise, okay, that they went north-south. And the Aron was an exception anyway to the rule according to everybody. Why that was, we explained. And then, right, and kind of more how they knew it, not why was it the case, but how they knew that that was the case, and that was all because of the Badim. And from there, we finished up with this machloket about the Shulchan and the Menorah, and we learned about these 10, and then how it all fit in the room, and how did all that work out. And we're still in the middle of this discussion. With that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day and a good week.